Okay, good day, people. I'm not sure how well this is going to come through, but I'm going to try anyway. There's been a lot of volley going on right now between and amongst Anacondavad, Conference Report, and Gary, and I want to say some things about this issue of existential guilt, the way that Anacondavad is representing it, and then some of the things that Conference Report has said as well about sort of this notion of the Kramer effect of being perpetually astonished at the world and being sort of open to it in some way. And I I guess for my own cut into this, I want to say some things about potentially that I think Anacondavad is deeply misrepresenting what what could be or should be meant by the notion of existential guilt. I feel as if, and this is I guess to you more, Andy, but it's as if you're suggesting that by the notion of existential guilt, that is the existentialists, and even there, the term existentialist was somewhat used as an epithet against people, and the term existential philosophy, or even better, phenomenology and existential philosophy, SPEP is the Society for Phenomenology and Existential Philosophy, and existentialism is was such a popular orientation, and it missed some of the depth over the question of what does one even mean by guilt. I feel as if there is a kind of an assumption in there that guilt is a psychological response to a felt wrongdoing or a shortcoming in one's moral responses to the world. And it's almost being delimited as something that can be simply overdone rather, and it's a point well taken. Okay, I want to acknowledge. Okay, yes, people can give guilt trips to people, and they can make guilt into something other than it is, but we need to do like an archaeology to get at what actually guilt is. See, I think for people like Sartre, the notion of guilt isn't simply the psychological phenomena of an individual feeling remorse or anxiety over a felt wrongdoing. It's not this. It's it has to do with the ambiguity of life itself, and with a self-conscious organism who has to bear the weight of decision making despite the ambiguity. That we're condemned to a kind of responsibility. And I think one of the fears, maybe that's not the best word, one of the concerns that I have with the new atheist movement, or just atheism in general, is its tendency to kind of dismiss guilt, maybe even suggest that guilt is simply psychological rather than an ontological problem for a self-aware being. I think it is the latter, that self-aware beings will ontologically encumber this phenomenon called guilt. Now, I think it's maybe better or more aptly described as an awkwardness over the responsibility of a finite being. See, that's the problem. That somehow we're finite beings, and yet we're responsible. What does it mean to be responsible? What does responsibility mean in a fully deterministic world? See, I think that's part of the difficulty. I mean, I think if people have kind of tied Gary into a knot, it's, as many people have over the years, and he just won't admit it, but he's refusing to admit that he has a deep and obvious contradiction. In one sense, he's admonishing people, he's trying to affect them, and yet simultaneously he's claiming that he's just playing out a mechanistic sequence of how he has been affected. So in some sense, it becomes a vacuous, sort of nothing. I think that the claim that you're suggesting, which is in earnest, he does believe it and is probably racked by more guilt than other people. Perhaps that's the case. But then the question becomes, is that what we mean by by guilt? Is guilt something that an individual is racked by? Or does a culture, do cultural forms shoulder the burden of guilt, and people hide under its cloak like they enjoy the warm smell of the herd? See, I think there is something very significant about the responsibility of what it means to be human. And that it's not just about laying guilt trips on people. That's the way that people try to dismiss the honest, open question of, do we have responsibilities that we're ignoring? And this was part of with Fred's notion on the Kramer stuff here. I mean, part of it is, I think there's a difference between happiness and pleasure, and meaningfulness may slide around in between those. That is, some kinds of pleasure can seem to be meaningful, some kinds of happiness can seem to be meaningful, but the question of to what extent is to what extent are we adequately responding to the natural kinds of guilt that should come from a self-aware being who's also responsible? I think that's not really being addressed. I think and this is for you, Andy. Andy, you could say that, well, people just have too much guilt and they need to stop it. Okay, I agree. Now my question for you is very direct. The question is, what is one to do? Where do you draw the line of responsibility? How exactly will you know whether you're overestimating or underestimating your obligations to the world? Is it not your problem, so many of the collective problems that we all face, whether it's it could be overpopulation, and I don't think you have to be some ridiculous ethicist or antinatalist. I think you can just choose to not have children. You can have a vasectomy. You could adopt. I mean, there's all different kinds of things that people can do. But it could be about minimizing one's footprint. It could be about being a great artist. It could be about making great contributions in every interaction one is ever in. There's all kinds of ways that one can handle what it means to be responsible. It could be an employer who has decided that they're going to make the lives of their employees their primary product rather than personal gain. The way that we handle what it means to be self-aware, and all of the different strategies should be on the table. The entire life game, like you should phrase it. The whole thing could be said a different way, which is, everything is goofed up and it's wrong right now. It seems as if so many things are wrong, and the solution isn't end the game, throw in the towel, but it isn't like, well, it's just a senseless, pointless, let's just roll on and forget about guilt, that's just an outdated crap anyway. No, the question is, the pangs of conscience are not going to go away, so what are we going to do? How could one think about using social networking sites? How could one think about the kind of possibilities that these kinds of technologies provide to, from the bottom up, help people start to rethink about what life could be like, what it ought to be like? Having everything to do with, the whole thing. What is meaningful work? What is the right to do with your own body whatever you would like, to put into your body what you want, to end your life when you want, to negotiate all of those individual wants in a responsible collectivist way as well. I mean, it's not just about freewheeling individualism, nor is it about totalitarian collectivist socialism, right? I think those are models. They're little, the things that we say, they're ways of talking. I think that part of the guilt is to not just say, well, screw it then, but not just to hide in the cloak of those forms that people use to carry the burden of the responsibility. See, I think there are lots and lots of social institutions which people have set up, whether they're governance or law or education, which are in some way diffusely carrying the guilt for us. That is, we feel that something should be done about educating people. Something should be done about keeping law and order. Something should be done about ensuring that justice is done when a grievance occurs, or when um, some evil occurrence happens and some people have to respond to that. I think the sense of what should be done, it's already echoing the sense of responsibility that we have. And then the question becomes, to what extent are so many of the cultural institutions now their own source of guilt, because they have learned to serve partisan interests, and rather than, I guess, expiate the guilt, shoulder the guilt in collectively responsible ways that we originally hoped and intended, they now have become guilt generating systems on their own because of their own inability to deal with what it means to grow in awareness while simultaneously facing finitude. See, I think that's the problem. That no one was there from the bottom up, and in the same way that children aren't there from the bottom up, but they find themselves acting in the world, and then later on they find themselves thinking more about the actions they've done, and slowly they grow in their moral evolution, and there's this dialectic of action and thought, and people aren't fully self-aware coming out of the womb. Self-awareness occurs in flashes and then slowly crystallizes, and then even there are various kinds of consciousness, whether it's sleeping or awake or intoxicated. But if you do that through history, you can see it as well, that the grand historical scale, the dawning of self-awareness has never been, I guess, as crystallized and as made explicit as with all of these modern technologies. Right? We're facing a radical opening of possibilities for guilt. And by guilt, I don't mean a personal wrongdoing. I mean a recognition of the human awkwardness in existence of being a finite organism. That is, an animal who's going to die, but who somehow feels self-awareness and the responsibilities of choice and agency that come with that, and then how to deal with that without either going mad or falling into forms of ideological dogma, which I think is what a lot of people do. Like if you look at a lot of Ernest Becker's work, so much of the guilt is never recognized as guilt, but it's sublimated, turned into collectivist ideologies, and then vented on others in the cult of the kill, in the song of the scapegoat. Yeah, people get together, and with either it's sexist pride or nationalistic pride or racist pride, they get together with their group, and then they identify some bad other, and then they think if they purge the world of that other, somehow the world's going to be a rosy place. That's just another form of the guilt. And those people might say, I don't feel any guilt at all. I'm just glad I'm an X, and I'm glad we're getting rid of Y. See, I think guilt operates in so many levels. It's not just a personal wrongdoing. I think the more that people would try to address what does it mean to be self-aware and know that one is going to die, and how does one flee from the various forms of agency that one faces. And when I say flee it, I mean absolve oneself of the decision making and the choice by hiding in already pre-fashioned collective apparatus, institutions, various ideologies that are already attempting perhaps to solve some of these ills, but are serving so many partisan interests. That's part of the problem. All right, I'm all over the place there, but I guess I just wanted to say that I think that some of the things that Andy was saying, Andy, I thought they were insightful. I agree that some of this stuff can be taken way too seriously, and one does want to have a perpetual wonder in life. But if perpetual wonder and amazement come at the cost of really letting other people rot in the street while some people benefit greatly, I mean, even if you personally have done nothing wrong, and you look at your own life and you know that you have nothing personally on your record against you, but you also know that you're doing nothing, that your inactivity was part of the condition that allowed for the exploitation of others from which you directly benefited, aren't you in some way responsible for that? Aren't you responsible for your inactivity, knowing how much you've gained from lots that perhaps isn't explicitly in awareness, unless you really think about it? All right, thanks.